Okay, so our next question is, what is a robocall? If you've been watching the news, you'll have noticed that the federal government has recently issued a new set of rules. It's actually incredibly long. We're going to do a whole webinar on this about the TCPA, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and when is it allowable to use a robo dialer or an auto dialer, computer dialer to call your cell phone. And so a robo dialer just means it's not a human being dialing in the numbers, but it's a computer doing that. So when is that allowable? Well, it's allowable if you've given permission to the company calling you or to a previous company. Here's what I mean by that. If you gave permission, and that's a whole different subject, we're not going to get into what constitutes permission or consent, but if you've given consent to, say, Capital One, and then they transfer it to a debt collector, now that debt collector's calling your phone, your cell phone, and you gave consent to call your cell phone with an auto dialer, computer dialer, then that's normally going to be okay. It'll be legal. Now, if you've revoked your consent, and the new law makes it clear, it's always been the law, but some companies and even some judges got confused on this. You can always revoke your consent. Okay, so if you say, yes, you may call me on my cell phone, later on you can say, you know what, don't call me on my cell phone anymore. And so if you gave consent, but then you revoked it, or if you never gave it in the first place, then those calls are illegal. And you can get actual damages, or what's more likely is what are called statutory damages. Those are damages that even if you cannot prove or don't want to prove that you were actually harmed, you can still get, it's $500 per call or up to $1,500 per call if it was a willful or intentional violation. Now, what's the point of those damages? It's to encourage these companies that just routinely break the law. They break it here and here and here, and all these people they're calling. This law says, you know what? If you do that, $500 per call, maybe as much as $1,500 per call. And we've had clients that have received hundreds of calls. And so it's very motivating to these companies. They can't stand this law. And they just go, this is so unfair. We ought to be able to just blow up anybody's cell phone anytime we want. Well, sorry, you don't get to do that. You don't get to blow up hospital rooms, 911, cell phones. There are reasons why this law has been in place for years and years and years and years. And so there's nothing wrong with calling a cell phone if you manually dial it, or you can use a computer or a robo dialer. You know, you get the phone call and it says, please hold for an important message. Well, that's not a human being saying that line. It's okay to do that as long as you have consent. And this law just says, look, make sure you have consent before you start using a computer to dial somebody's phone, maybe once, 4, 5, 10 times a day. Makes sense to me. Same thing with text messages. Don't send automated text messages unless you have permission to do that. So again, we'll go into this law in more detail, maybe a couple weeks from now. I forget when we have that scheduled. And we're doing a national webinar for lawyers. You know, that's a paid webinar where lawyers all over the country will be on that webinar where we talk about using this in the context of class actions. But I'm talking about one for consumers. We'll do this, obviously no charge for it. We put out all of our material free of charge so that you know what your rights are and so that you will know what action to take if you have a company that's violating this law.